You said you need good whiskey, good whiskey in your life. Yeah, you need good whiskey.
Hello there, Mark from Whisky Watch. Top of the evening to you. It's St. Patrick's Day, and as promised, here's the Whisky Watch live broadcast from Center Parcs in Cumbria. So I've got my very good friends here. I've got Andy on this side, and I've got Graham on this side, and we're going to try a couple of Irish whiskies for you, or in actual fact, if you look down here, there's about 6 or 7. So we're going to give them a whirl. They're all different in their own way. So very good evening to you. I realise it's all a bit serious at the minute, and the coronavirus and everybody getting worried, and yes, that's very serious, and we need to look after our vulnerable people. But make sure there's a little bit of a light-hearted for Patrick's Day. All the poor people in Ireland, all the pubs are closed on St. Patrick's Day. What a nightmare. So anyway, this is it. We're off. St. Patrick's Day, what's it all about? It's a celebration of Irish culture, and it's a national holiday, and it started as a religious feast to recognise St. Patrick. But of course, it's become an international festival of all sorts of things Irish on St. Patrick's Day. So who was St. Patrick? And he's a 5th century Romano-British Christian missionary, and he was the first bishop of County Armagh, or Armagh in Ireland. And he was born in 384 in Roman Britain, and he died in 461, aged 77. Anyway, we're talking about whiskey with an E this evening. So what we've got here are quite a few Irish whiskies, whiskey with an E. Whiskey comes from whisker, which is known as the water of life, and that's Gaelic, Scottish, Irish, pronouncing whisker, corrupting to the word whiskey. Now, so Irish didn't always have an E in whiskey, funnily enough. If you're ever in a pub in Belfast in Northern Ireland, there is a Duke of York pub, and you'll see some really old mirrors in that pub on the wall. They're still there, and it says Irish whiskey, and there's no E. Why is there an E in whiskey and there's an E in American whiskey? But really, across the rest of the world, there is no E in the word whiskey. So it's a corruption, mainly from the Scottish-based in Northern Ireland over the years. And then a lot of them went from Northern Ireland to America, and they took that corruption with the E in, and that's where the American whiskey got their E from. So not many people know that. What happened was they invented a continuous still. It's called a coffee still. And that brought in really mass-produced cheap whiskey, grain spirits, so not barley, different wheat like wheat or rye, and that's cheaper to make than barley. At that point, Ireland was the whiskey powerhouse of the world, really, more than Scotland. And what happened when they introduced this continuous still? Anyway, in 1860, they were allowed to mix barley with other spirits together, and it was made legal to be able to make whiskey that way. And by 1879, they all got together to denounce that name of whiskey and blends. It cannot be called whiskey, ought not to be called whiskey, it should not be sold under that name, and therefore this is where the E came in. Anyway, some people like John Power, who came up with Powers whiskey, if you've heard of Irish Powers whiskey, he actually said that the E stood for excellence. So as soon as that was introduced, he was on that and marketing whiskey with an E, and the E was the added excellence. That argument rumbled on until 1908, and is it good whiskey, is it bad whiskey, grain whiskey, malted barley whiskey, what's the difference, one better than the other? But the Royal Commission in 1908 ruled the mix of grain and malt spirits in any sort of still can legally be called whiskey. So it's from that point on really where you had the whiskey with an E and the whiskey without an E, and they were both of equal standing in the market. Really, Paddy's whiskey, which we'll come to, they held out adding the E into their whiskey until the 1960s. So that's an interesting little spin on things. How many whiskey distilleries are there? There's an interesting question. Now, you probably can't see this, but here's a map of Ireland. And now, there's down this side here, what is it, 30? 27 different distilleries now. Now, for a long, long time, there used to be 3 distilleries. Dublin had the Jamesons. They eventually moved down to Middleton in County Cork. and Bushmills in the north of Ireland was the second big distillery. And then only in 1987 did Cooley's come along, and then Kilbeggan came along in 2007. A little bit of chat, a little bit of background on St Patrick. These two now are chomping at the bit to try some of this Irish whiskey. So our first one is going to be the Crested 10. This is from the Jameson family. It's a trip. Most of Irish distilleries are triple distill. They distill it 3 times, and it gives it a smoother flavour, really, more or less. So I'm going to give Andy this one, and he can try that first of all to see what you think of that. So we're having the Crested 10, Jameson family. It's blend of aged whiskies, so it doesn't give an age, and that's very typical in Irish whiskey, as opposed to Scotch whiskey. It's a blend of whiskies. It's been around since 1963, so only just a little bit younger than me. It's a mix of pot stilled grain whiskey and barley whiskey. It's about 60-40 split between whiskey and grain and barley. And it is sherry matured partly, so I quite like that. What are you thinking?
It's very sweet.
Yeah.
Very smooth, as you've just said.
Yeah.
It's a cracker.
There we are. That's a good hit so far. So smooth, sweet, very typical of Irish whiskey, smooth and sweet. I think they're all about 40%, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that one certainly is 40%. So not a single malt by any stretch of the imagination. Very typical of Irish whiskies, where they're not a single malt. They're a mix of grained whiskies and malt whiskies. So, number 2. We'll get Graham to try this.
Thank you.
Paddy whiskey. So, Paddy whiskey. There's a bit of a story with Paddy whiskey and why it became Paddy whiskey. This was, at the point it was recently sold, it was the 4th largest selling Irish whiskey in the world. Paddy whiskey. Now, it was been around since 1879, but by 1912 they changed it to Paddy whiskey, and what happened was, in 1882, Paddy Flaherty was a salesman, and he used to go around Ireland, and the name of the whiskey at the time was called Cork Distillery Old Irish Whiskey. What a mouthful. So Paddy used to go around trying to sell that named whiskey in barrels at that point, and what happened was, the publicans used to run low on stock. I want some of that Paddy's whiskey because I'm running low on the stocks. So they'd order cases of Paddy's whiskey. So in 1912, in his honour, Paddy Flaherty became Paddy whiskey. So it's a bit of an interesting story, and it's true. They also were one of the first to do their own bottlings as well. So in the 1920s and the 1930s, they took on bottling, which was quite unusual really at the time. Right, Graham, have you had a slip of that there?
Certainly have.
And what are you thinking?
It's smooth, little peppery.
Okay, peppery. That's a really good, interesting comment, because I'll get to another one in a second that's peppery. Let's move on to Tullamore Dew. So Tullamore is from County Offaly. Tullamore Dew. So try that one, Andy, for us.
Thank you very much.
It's matured in oak casks. They actually do a 14-year-old single malt version of Tullamore Dew, but this is a blended whiskey. Anyway, go on, you tell me, because I've got a note of what I thought it was like.
When you taste it, I'm getting something more along the lines of pear drops and that.
Excellent. So fruity flavour, possibly because it's a bit young. Fruity flavour, biscuity sort of flavour. And it's matured in these oak casks, so you get a little bit of toasted wood flavour with the Tullamore Dew. Right, next up, Jameson, good old Jameson. Fantastic drink, I love it with Coke. But that's not to say I don't like it on its own as well. Another 40%, Jameson Distillery in Cork. We're going to give Graham the honour of trying that one.
Thank you.
It's a lot of people know the Jameson. It's pot stilled. It's a mix of malted and unmalted barley and grain whiskey, so it gets a bit complicated there, doesn't it? Malted barley, so you get the sugars for a sweeter taste. Unmalted barley, but also grain whiskey. So, what are you getting there, Graham?
It is sweet.
Yeah.
Less peppery. And
Okay.
smoother, nicer.
You find that smoother? That's interesting. So you like not as peppery, but smoother Again, a triple distilled. So, on the theme of peppery, from the same family, from the Jameson family, we've got the 12-year-old Jameson Irish whiskey. So now we're getting into a little bit of an age statement, whereas none of the others, I reckon they're probably 4, 5, 6 years old maybe, but this is twice that. And here you go, Andy. There's the...
Say the Crested 10's about 7 or 8 years.
The Redbreast, yeah. So sisters or brothers, the Crested 10. Yeah, malted and unmalted barley, oak matured, single pot still. What I find with this, because Graham mentioned peppery, what are you thinking?
I would definitely say peppery, and I'd definitely say it's my number one so far tonight.
Ah, there we are, you see. And I must admit, it's probably would be mine, but I'm not sampling them right now. But I will be later. Yeah, fantastic drink, the 12-year-old. Lovely dram, not too expensive. However, they do a 15-year-old version, and it's ridiculously priced. I can't really tell much in it. And if I'm ever in your company one night, I'll tell you about drinking this with Right Said Fred in a hotel in Belfast, but that's for another day. So we'll move on. I've got 2 more, so we won't bore you for much longer. Right, so the Bushmills, again, no age statement, triple distilled, smooth and mellow, it says. So from Northern Ireland, lovely little distillery, one of the oldest in the world, I believe, from 16 something, if I'm not mistaken. Well, what's this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the 6th. So what are you thinking of that one, Graham? So you've mentioned before.
This is my favourite.
You're liking that, are you?
It's smoother, oilier.
Okay.
But, yeah,
What about peppery?
Not peppery.
Not peppery at all. Okay, so that's your favourite of the ones we've tried so far, right?
Okay.
So just as a surprise for Andy, so you've got the Bushmills, which doesn't have an age statement, okay, triple distilled Bushmills. What I did find at home was the 10-year-old single malt version of Bushmills. So it'd be an interesting comparison between the two, because this is only malted barley, and it's been in a cask for 10 years, so very Scotch fashion, if you like. So, and you might want to swap. Yeah, I'll tell you what I'll do, Graham. I'll pour you another one.
Yeah,
I know I'm being a bit light-hearted about the coronavirus. I know it's very serious, but you know, it's St. Patrick's Day, so we need a little bit of light-heartedness. There you are. Have a bit of a comparison of the two there, Graham, because you've got, that's the 10. What are you thinking of the 10, Andy? As a single malt.
There's a longer nose on it. I think.
Okay.
As Graham said to the last one, yeah, it's more oily. It's more viscous.
Any pepper?
Definitely pepper.
Yeah.
Although with the number of whiskies I've had tonight,
A little bit. I have to say we've raced through it. And what about your thoughts, Graham?
The 10-year-old is that bit smoother.
just smooth.
You know, and a nice dram. Yes, definitely.
So of all of the ones you've tried, what do you think in terms of that?
Bushmills 10.
You're going to go for the Bushmills 10. What about you, Graham?
Yeah, Bushmills 10.
That's interesting, isn't it?
The Redbreast.
Because yeah, because that's closer to a Scotch whiskey, and that's your favourite. So I'm not sure what that says, but anyway. So we're probably going to leave you there, but just to finish off, because everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day, aren't we? And I got my DNA done not so long ago, so I can talk about St. Patrick's Day, right? Because I am 62% Irish. Yes. So that's why I like St. Patrick's Day, and I never knew that. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's a bit of a spin. It's a bit of a quick tour. Please be careful out there with all of. We're here in Center Parcs. Everything's open at the moment, but I believe it's going to close on Friday. So that's unfortunate, but we've managed to get away with it. We're all together, being careful, washing our hands, worrying about the people who are at risk. But it's still St. Patrick's Day, so we're going to have a little whiskey and think of what's going to go on. All the very best to you. Hope to see you again very soon on Whisky Watch. And Slàinte mhath! Slàinte mhath! Bye now. See you soon.